The brakes never came. That was the part nobody could explain afterward, the part that kept turning over in the heads of the people who saw it. The black Cadillac came off the county road doing better than 60 in a stretch, posted for 25, and it did not slow, and it did not swerve, not until the last quarter second, when a man in the crosswalk threw himself sideways and the only thing the car caught was the old yellow dog at the end of a frayed rope leash. There was a sound. Then there was a worse silence. The dog did not yelp the way dogs do in movies. It made one short, broken noise, and then it was just down on the warm August asphalt, and the rope was still looped around the wrist of the man who had been walking it, and the Cadillac was already 200 feet down the road and accelerating, its taillights bright and unhurried. A long, clean shape sliding back into the part of town where men, like its driver, believed nothing could ever touch them. The man holding the leash did not chase it. He could not have. He went down on both knees in the middle of Sutter Street with his big scarred hands hovering over the animal, afraid to touch, afraid not to, and the people coming out of the hardware store and the laundromat and the bakery all stopped where they stood because they knew the man. Everyone in Halford Springs knew the man. They just did not know what was about to happen, and neither did the driver, and neither did the town. His name was Roy Decker. He was 61 years old, and he had buried a wife and a son and most of his patients. And the dog bleeding out in the road was named Biscuit, and Biscuit was, as far as anyone could tell, the last living thing on the earth that Roy Decker loved. To understand what came next, you have to go back a little, not far, just far enough to understand the man on his knees. Roy had ridden into Halford Springs 11 years before on a road-worn Harley with a duffel bag bunged to the sissy bar and a leather cut on his back so faded the patches had gone the color of old tobacco. The cut read Desert Kings across the top rocker and Ack Vortis Springs across the bottom, and below the winged skull in the center it read, in small letters, Past President. He had handed off the gavel of his charter 2 states over and pointed his front wheel at the only town where his late wife had ever said she felt like she could breathe, and he had stopped riding and started fixing. He opened a shop at the dead end of Sutter Street, a cinder block bay with a hand-painted sign, and he fixed bikes and mowers and the occasional truck, and he kept to himself, and the town learned to let him. The dog had found him, not the other way around. Showed up at the shop one winter half-starved with a coat the color of dirty straw and one torn ear, and Roy had fed it. Once, meaning nothing by it, and the dog had simply decided the matter was settled. That was 9 years ago. Biscuit slept in the shop on a folded moving blanket and rode in a milk crate Roy had bolted behind his seat, goggles and all, and the town had gotten so used to the sight of the old biker and the old yellow dog that nobody really saw it anymore. It was just part of the street, like the flickering O in the lacquer sign 2 doors down, like the crack in the sidewalk shaped like a river. There were people in town who could have told you, if you asked the right way, that Roy had not always been a fixture. The woman who ran the bakery remembered the first winter when he was just the silent man at the end of the street who paid cash and said nothing, and how the children had been a little afraid of him. And how that had changed the spring. A storm took the roof off the elementary school equipment shed, and a man on an old Harley had shown up at dawn with a borrowed ladder and rebuilt it in 2 days and refused to be thanked. They remembered the time he pulled a teenager's truck out of the river ditch at 2 in the morning in the rain and drove the boy home and never told the boy's father. They had stopped being afraid of him a long time ago. They had not, it would turn out, ever really known him. A town can live next to a man for 11 years and only see the shape of him, never the weight. The driver of the Cadillac was named Preston Vance. He was 34, and he had a jaw you could open mail with, and a way of looking at a room like he was deciding which parts of it to keep. His father owned the bank, the title company, two of the three car dealerships, and a controlling interest in the county commission, and what his father owned, Preston borrowed against. He had wrecked 3 cars before this one, and there had been a girl on a moped 2 summers back who walked with a cane. Now, and none of it had ever cost him a thing, past a check his father wrote without looking up. He believed, the way you believe, in gravity, that the world bent around the Vance name. He had every reason to believe it. The world had never once told him otherwise. He had been drinking since noon at the country club, and he had a passenger, and that passenger would matter later more than anyone in that car could have guessed. All of that came after. In the moment on Sutter Street, there was only Roy and Biscuit and the rope. A kid from the bakery, maybe 10 years old with flour on his apron, was the first to move. He ran out with a clean dish towel because his mother had shoved it into his hands, and he stopped a few feet from the kneeling man because the man was so big and so still that the boy's courage ran out. Roy looked up at him. Whatever the boy had braced for, it was not the wet shine in the old man's eyes. "Towel," Roy said. His voice came out wrong, thin and cracked, nothing like the gravel the town associated with him. The boy handed it over and backed away and did not run, and that was its own small kind of bravery. And Roy would remember it. He pressed the towel where the worst of it was. Biscuit's eyes found him and held. The tail moved once against the asphalt, a slow thump the way it had moved every single morning for 9 years when Roy unlocked the shop. "Stay," Roy said. "You stay with me. We are not doing this today." The vet was 4 blocks over. A man named Tom Aldrich came out of the crowd with his shirt already off and bunched in his hand to add pressure. And another man backed a truck around, and 4 of them lifted the dog on the moving blanket someone sprinted to the shop to grab. And Roy rode in the bed with both hands pressed down and his lips moving and no sound coming out. The truck ran every stop sign between Sutter Street and the clinic, and not one person in Halford Springs would later say it should have stopped. Biscuit lived. That was the first thing the town did not expect, and it was not the last. The surgery took most of the night. Roy was not allowed in the room, so he stood in the hallway of the little clinic with his back against the cinder block and his arms folded and his eyes on the strip of light under the door. Tom Aldrich stood with him for the first 2 hours without saying anything, which was the right thing to say. The clock on the waiting room wall was the kind that ticked, and Roy counted the ticks for a while because counting was better than thinking, and then he stopped counting because the number got too high. A second vet tech came in near midnight, called from home, still pulling her hair back as she pushed through the door, and she gave Roy a nod on her way past that said the dog was worth waking up for, and Roy held on to that nod for the rest of the night. At one point, Dr. Quinn came out for 90 seconds to drink half a cup of cold coffee and tell him the dog's heart was strong. She had a smear of something on her cheek, and her hands were not quite steady from the work. And she looked at the old man and saw what was sitting on him, and she put one hand flat on his forearm. Just for a moment, the way you touch a horse to let it know where you are. Then she went back in. Roy looked at the place on his arm where her hand had been. Nobody had touched him in a long time. He had not known how long until just then. It cost more than Roy had, and he paid it without a word. Peeling bills off a roll that took most of what was in the coffee can, he kept under the workbench. 3 legs would mend. 1 would not. Sarah Quinn, who ran the clinic alone and had not slept, came out to the waiting room at 4 in the morning with blood on her scrubs and told him the back left leg could not be saved. And Roy nodded like a man receiving a sentence he had already guessed, and he asked only one question. Will he still know me? He already does, she said. He never stopped. Roy sat in the plastic waiting room chair until the sun came up. He did not call anyone. He had no one to call, or so the town believed. Here is what the town did not know yet, the thing that had been sleeping for 11 years under that faded cut. A man does not stop being a past president of a motorcycle club the way he stops being a mailman. The patch comes off the road. It does not come off the man. And in a desk drawer in the back of a cinder block shop under a stack of paid invoices and a photograph of a woman laughing in front of a Joshua tree, there was a phone with exactly 9 numbers saved in it. And Roy Decker had not dialed a single one of them in over a decade because he had promised that woman in the photograph that he was done. And he kept his promises to her even now that she was 11 years in the ground. He did not dial them that morning either. That was the second thing the town did not expect. They expected those who had heard the whispers about who Roy used to be, that the old biker would go to war. He did not. He went to the law. He believed still, in spite of everything his old life had taught him, that a man should give the proper channels their chance first. It was a mistake. He learned it was a mistake by 10 o'clock the next morning. He walked into the sheriff's substation on Main with the dish towel folded in a plastic bag, brown and stiff now, and he laid it on the counter and he asked for the deputy on duty. He gave the make and the color of the car, and the direction it had gone, and the fact that it had not slowed, not braked, not once, and that there had been at least 30 people on that street who saw it. The deputy, a soft young man named Briggs, wrote some of it down. Then he stopped writing. You got a plate. Roy did not have a plate. It had happened in 2 seconds, and he had been looking at his dog. Without a plate, Briggs said, and he had the decency to look uncomfortable. And with the animal surviving, this is going to be a tough one. Property damage at most. And Mr. Decker, I'd want to be careful throwing the color black Cadillac around in this town. You understand me? Roy understood him. He understood him completely. He picked up the bag with the towel in it, and he said thank you in a voice that frightened the deputy more than shouting would have, and he walked out into the white morning sun. And he stood on the steps of the substation for a long moment, and he did a thing he had taught himself not to do. He let himself get angry. Just for a breath, then, he folded it up and put it away, because anger was a tool and you did not waste a tool on the parking lot. He drove the strip of road from the country club to Sutter Street 4 times that week, slow, in his truck with the windows down. On the 4th pass he found what he was looking for. A glint, low in the weeds, at the foot of a power pole near the crosswalk, where the car had cut the corner. A side mirror, sheared clean off black with a fragment of housing still attached, and on the inside of the housing, stamped in the plastic, a parts number. Roy had spent 40 years around machines. A parts number was a name to him. He put the mirror in the truck, and he drove home, and he sat with it on the workbench under the lamp for a long time, turning it in his scarred hands. He could have called the 9 numbers then. He almost did. Instead, he called a man named Eli. Eli Marsh was 26, and he ran the computer repair counter at the strip mall out by the highway, and he had a thin neck and thick glasses and a death's head of his own, though his was a tattoo and not a patch, and his club was online and global and had no clubhouse. Roy had fixed his motorcycle for free the previous spring after Eli's father, a long-haul driver, died on the interstate and left the boy a Sportster. He did not know how to keep running. Eli had tried to pay, and Roy had refused, and told him the way old bikers do, that the debt would find its own shape someday. Now it had. Roy laid the mirror on Eli's counter, the way he had laid the towel on the deputies, and he asked one question, and Eli looked at the parts number and then at the old man and pushed his glasses up his nose. That's off of Lefty. Driver's side. Specific model year. This town, that car, that money? Eli almost smiled. There's maybe 2 of those within 100 miles, and one of them belongs to exactly who you think it does. I need it quiet, Roy said. Decker, Eli said. You have no idea how quiet I can be. Roy did not tell Eli everything. He told him a man had hit Biscuit and run, and he told him the parts number, and he told him a plate would be enough. He did not tell him about the 9 numbers in the drawer, or about the woman in the photograph, or about the kind of man he used to be, because the boy did not need the weight of it. Eli took the mirror in both hands like it was something breakable, and turned it under the counter light, and for a second his jaw worked, and Roy understood that the boy was thinking about an interstate and a truck and a phone call in the middle of the night, and that this was not, for Eli, about a dog at all. Some debts pay themselves in directions you do not expect. What Eli found over the next 9 days, working at night with the counter lights off, and his father's old Sportster parked where he could see it through the window, was not a parts number. The parts number was just the door. Behind the door was everything. He started with the obvious thing, the body shops, because a sheared mirror and a scraped panel had to be fixed somewhere, and rich men do not fix their own cars. There were 6 shops in the county that did Cadillac work. 5 of them kept clean modern records that he could not get into without leaving a footprint. The 6th ran a billing program so old that Eli laughed out loud alone in the dark when he saw the login screen, a program from a decade back that the shop had never updated because the owner did not believe in spending money on things that already worked. It worked. It worked for Eli beautifully. He found the body shop work order, dated the morning after, marked Rush, and paid cash, for a black Cadillac, driver's side mirror, and a long scrape down the rocker panel, brought in by a man who was not Preston Vance, but who worked security for the Vance family. He found, because the body shop's billing software was a decade out of date and wide open, that this was the 4th such rush job billed to that same borrowed name in 3 years. He printed nothing at first. He just sat and read, scrolling back through 3 years of a family's casual destruction, and the further back he went, the colder he got. He found the moped girl. He found a settlement sealed with a number in it that made even Eli sit back from the screen. He found a pattern, and a pattern is a thing the law calls a habit, and a thing a biker calls a debt that has been running too long without being collected. On the 7th night, he called Roy and said only, "It's bigger than the dog," and hung up, and Roy did not sleep that night either. And then Eli found the passenger. There had been someone in the Cadillac that afternoon. Eli knew it because the country club valet logged plates and times, and the log showed the car leaving with 2 and a phone that had pinged the same tower at the same minute as Preston's, and that second phone belonged to a young woman named Cassie Lund, 22, a server at the club, who had clocked out early that day and had not come in since, and whose own car still sat in the club's back lot under a tarp of fallen leaves. Because she was too afraid to go get it, she had seen the whole thing. She had been screaming at Preston to stop. He had laughed. Roy did not go to Cassie Lund and lean on her. That was the 3rd thing the town did not expect, from a man they were now quietly certain had been something dangerous once. He sent Dr. Sapters. Quinn, instead, vet, because a frightened young woman would open a door to a tired, kind woman with a kind face that she would never open to a 61-year-old man with a faded skull on his back. Sarah Quinn sat in Cassie's mother's kitchen for 2 hours and did not ask her for a single thing. She only told her about a dog named Biscuit, who was learning to walk on 3 legs, and an old man who slept on the clinic floor next to the cage, so the dog would not wake up alone. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and old coffee. Cassie's mother had put out a plate of store cookies nobody touched, and then made herself scarce in the next room, and Cassie sat with her hands wrapped around a mug she never drank from, and for the first hour she said almost nothing. Sarah did not push into the silence. She talked instead about the ramp Roy was building, and about how a 3-legged dog figures out its new balance in about a week and then acts like it never had 4. And about how the old man had been bringing the dog chicken he cooked himself on a hot plate in the shop because the dog would not eat kibble while it healed. She made it small and ordinary and warm, and she watched the young woman's shoulders come down an inch at a time. It was the chicken that did it, oddly. Something about a hard old man standing over a hot plate cooking chicken for a hurt dog. Cassie's chin started to go, and she set the mug down very carefully, like it might break, and she said, "He laughed, and that was the crack the whole thing came through." And somewhere in the second hour, Cassie Lund started to cry. And then she started to talk, and Sarah Quinn just listened and wrote nothing down. Because some things you do not write down, you just carry until the person is ready to set them on the table themselves. It was Cassie who said the thing that changed everything. It was not the hit. The hit was just a dog to men like the Vances, and a dog, the deputy had made clear, was property. It was what Preston had said after drunk and proud with the dog 300 feet behind them in the road. He had said it was the 3rd time he had hit something on that stretch and gotten away clean, and he had laughed about the moped girl by name, and he had said his father had a man on the commission and a man at the substation, and that the road belonged to them, and always would. A man on the commission, a man at the substation. Roy turned those words over for a long time. He was not, it turned out, fighting a drunk in a Cadillac. He was fighting the machine that protected the drunk in the Cadillac. And you do not beat a machine by getting angry at one of its parts. You beat it by handing it something it cannot swallow in front of enough people that it cannot pretend the thing was never offered. Now he picked up the phone in the desk drawer, not to call the 9 numbers, to make one call to a man named Hollis who had ridden with him 30 years and was the only one of the 9 he trusted with a thing that had to stay leashed. He told Hollis what he had. He told him what he wanted, which was nothing thrown, nothing broken, nothing that would let the machine call them animals and win. "How many?" Hollis said. It was the first thing he had said in 10 minutes. "None," Roy said. "I do not want the club in this. I want exactly one thing from you, and then I want you to forget I called." There was a long quiet on the line. Then Hollis said the thing that Roy had known he would say because it was the thing the code said, the thing the patch meant under all the faded thread. "Roy," he said, "you spent 40 years answering that phone for other men. You buried Mara and you went dark, and not one of us blamed you. But you do not get to decide alone that we sit this one out. That is not how it works, and you know it is not how it works. Some of us are going to come. We are going to come slow, and we are going to come legal, and we are going to park where the law says we can park. But we are going to come. The dog rode behind you. That makes the dog ours, too." Roy Decker put his hand over his eyes in the dark of the shop. an old man at a workbench, and for the first time since the breaks never came, he was not alone. The county commission met on the second Tuesday of every month in the basement of the courthouse, in a room with bad fluorescent light and 40 folding chairs that were never close to full. The agenda for this particular Tuesday was a rezoning, a water line dispute, and the routine reappointment of the Road Safety Oversight Liaison, a position held, as it happened, by the elder Vance's chosen man. It was the kind of meeting nobody attended. People started attending around 6 o'clock. They came in plain clothes, mostly, the bakery family and the hardware store owner, and Tom Aldrich with his shirt back on and the flower-aproned boy holding his mother's hand, and Dr. Gakier, Sarah Quinn in a clean blouse with a manila folder on her lap, and Cassie Lund, pale and small and there, which was the bravest thing in the room. They filled the folding chairs. Then they filled the back wall. The commission chairman, a Vance man named Albright, watched the room fill with the expression of someone who has heard a sound in the house at night, and at 6:40 the windows began to hum. It came in low at first, a vibration you felt in the soles of your feet before you heard it in your ears, and then it climbed engine over engine over engine, the sound rolling down Main and into the courthouse square, and the people in the basement looked at each other, and the boy ran to the high window well and pressed his face to it and said, "Whisper that carried in the dead quiet room. Motorcycles, a whole bunch of motorcycles. There were not as many as the legend would later claim. There were 19. 19 old riders on 19 machines, desert kings across 19 backs, and they came down Main at a walking pace, and they parked in a single disciplined row in the public lot. Every front wheel turned the same number of degrees, and they shut the engines down all at once. And the silence after was the loudest thing the town had ever heard. Then they walked, unhurried, into the courthouse and down the stairs, and they did not crowd, and they did not shout. They stood along the back wall with their hands folded in front of them like men in church, and at the center of them, walking in last, was Roy Decker, in the same faded cut, with a yellow dog limping at the end of a new leather leash, 3 good legs, and a wrapped stump and a tail going like a metronome. They were not young men. That was the thing nobody had expected, and nobody could quite name. The town had braced in the few minutes between the boy at the window and the boots on the stairs for something out of a nightmare, for size and menace and shouting. What came down the stairs instead was old, gray beards and reading glasses pushed up on foreheads, and one man with a cane he did not lean on so much as carry. Hollis came in at the front of them, 70 if he was a day, barrel-chested under a cut gone soft and pale at the seams, and his eyes moved across the room once, slow, taking account of exits and faces the way a man does when he has spent a lifetime walking into places that might go bad. And then he found the back wall, and he stood at it, and the others arranged themselves around him without a word passing between any of them. There was a discipline to it that was more frightening than violence would have been. Because violence, you can understand, this you could only feel. The chairman gave Ald for order that nobody was disturbing. His hand was not steady. The little wooden block clacked too hard and skipped out of his grip, and he had to reach for it, and 40 people watched him reach for it. And that small fumble told the room everything about who was in charge now and who only believed he was. Roy did not go to the podium. He sent Sarah Quinn. That was the 4th thing the town did not expect, and it was the one that won it. The vet stood up with her manila folder, and she did not raise her voice once. She laid it out flat and clean and dated, the way you read a chart, the work orders, the borrowed name, the 4 rush jobs in 3 years, the sealed settlement and the girl with the cane. the valet log, and then she said that there was a witness who had been in the car, and that the witness was present and willing to speak, and she sat down. Cassie Lund stood up. She told it plain. Her voice shook on the first sentence, and did not shake on any after. She looked at her own hands for the first few words, and then she lifted her eyes, and she did not lower them again. She told them about the lunch service and clocking out early and getting in the car because Preston had offered and she had been afraid to say no to a Vance. She told them what Preston had said about the moped girl and what he had said about the road belonging to the Vances and what he had said about a man on the commission and a man at the substation. And at that last part, the room did not gasp. It went still in the particular way a room goes still when 40 people all decide the same thing in the same second. The chairman, Albright, made the mistake of trying to recess. He never got the word fully out because the elder Vance was in the room in the front row, because he always came to the meetings where his man was reappointed and Preston was beside him in a blazer with a country club crest, and Preston, who had never once in his life been told no by a room, stood up to laugh it off the way he laughed everything off. And he looked back at the wall of leather to find the joke, and the joke was not there. What was there was 19 still men and an old man holding a 3-legged dog, and not one of them said a word to him. That was the thing that broke him. Not a threat. There was no threat. Roy Decker had built the entire night specifically so that there would never be a threat for the machine to point at. There was only the truth, on a table, in front of the town, and there was the dog, alive, looking at Preston Vance with a dog's whole forgiving heart. And there was the unbearable weight of 19 men who had crossed 3 states to stand silently against a wall, and Preston Vance felt, for the first time in 34 years. The floor of the world tilt under the Vance name. He started talking. He could not stop himself. He said it was an accident, and that the dog ran out and that he barely felt it, and every word dug the hole deeper. Because Cassie had already told the room, he laughed. And the more he talked, the more the room saw the laughing in him, and his father reached up and took his son by the sleeve and said his name once, low and final, the way you say a name when something is over. And Preston sat down, and, in sitting down, he understood. You could see it land in his face, that his father was not protecting him this time. His father was cutting him loose. Because the machine's first law is that the machine survives, and a son who laughs at a moped girl in front of 40 witnesses and a wall of bikers and a local vet's documented folder is no longer an asset to the machine. He is a liability. And the elder Vance had not built what he built by carrying liabilities. The road safety liaison was not reappointed that night. The commission, suddenly and unanimously, and with a great show of civic concern, voted to refer the entire matter, the folder and the testimony, and all of it to the state, where the Vance name was just a name and the man on the commission and the man at the substation. The Deputy Briggs, watching from the doorway, went home that night and wrote a different kind of report than the one he had filed before. Because a young man who has seen which way the wind has turned will sometimes find his courage in the draft. Roy Decker never said a word at that meeting. He did not have to. He had spent 11 years being a quiet old man with a shop and a dog and one drunk in a Cadillac, had reminded the town and reminded Roy what the quiet had been holding back. The Vances did not flee Halford Springs in a single night, the way the stories would later tell it. The machine came apart slower than that, the way machines do, a bolt at a time. The state investigators came in unmarked sedans 3 weeks later and parked them right out in front of the courthouse where everyone could see, and they did not need a man on the commission or a man at the substation because they had Eli's clean printed trail and Cassie's sworn statement. Quinn's folder and habits are easy to prove once someone hands you the ledger. The elder Vance sold the country club stake within the year and moved his accounts and his attention 2 counties east, and Preston went somewhere the family does not discuss, and the girl with the cane got a second settlement, an honest one this time with no seal on it. Cassie Lund got her car back from under the leaves and got something better, which was the thing a person gets when they find out they were braver than they ever believed. She started taking night classes that winter. She told people, when they asked what changed, that she had watched a vet read a folder to a room full of frightened people without once raising her voice, and had decided she wanted to be the kind of person who could do that. And the road on that stretch of county highway got, at long last, a light and a lower limit that was actually enforced, because the state does not care whose father owns the bank. Briggs, the deputy, did not lose his job, though he had braced for it. He kept it, and he kept it differently than before. He started writing every report straight, even the ones that made powerful people unhappy, and there were fewer of those powerful people now to be unhappy, and the town noticed, the way a town always notices, and the noticing made him a little braver each month. Years later, he would tell new deputies, without naming names, about a night in a basement when an old man taught him that the law is only as honest as the people willing to write it down plainly, and that courage, it turns out, is mostly just a draft you decide to stand in. None of that is the thing the town remembers. The thing the town remembers is the silence in that basement, and the row of front wheels all turned the same degree in the public lot, and an old man who had every reason and every means to burn the whole thing down, and who chose instead to set a folder on a table and let the truth do what trucks and fists could not. Biscuit heeled crooked. The leg that was gone left him with a hitch, a little dip in his walk on the left side, and he never minded it. Roy built him a ramp up into the milk crate behind the seat, and on the first cool morning of that fall, the two of them rode out the dead end of Sutter Street and down the new-lit highway with the goggles on and the wrapped stump tucked safe, and the town watched them go the way you watch something you almost lost, which is to say, you really see it, finally, for the first time in years. Hollis and the others rode out the same morning. 19 machines headed back the 3 states they had come from, and at the edge of town Roy pulled, even with Hollis at the light, and the 2 old men looked at each other and neither of them said anything, because the code had already been spoken and there was nothing to add to it. Hollis lifted 2 fingers off the grip. Roy lifted 2 back. Then the light went green and the Kings rolled on, and Roy turned around and rode home, where a 3-legged dog and a quiet shop and a town that finally knew his name were waiting. He hung the new leather leash on the nail by the door. Next to the old frayed rope he could not bring himself to throw away. He stood there a moment in the doorway with the morning sun on his back. Then he went inside and unlocked the shop, the same as every morning, and the dog limped to its blanket and turned around 3 times and lay down, and its tail went thump against the floor, slow and easy, and the smell of the place was motor oil and warm dust and something else now, something a man only recognizes once he has it back, and Roy Decker stood in the middle of it and let himself, at last, feel free. If you have ever loved something the world decided was beneath its notice, then you already know what was on the table in that basement, and you already know why 19 men crossed 3 states to stand against a wall and say nothing at all. If this story moved you, take a moment to let it sit and then pass it to someone who needs to remember that the quiet ones are quiet by choice. Thank you for listening.